Did you know that all experiences in your life are for you? Welcome to Soul Musings, exploring and embracing higher perspectives with me, Dr. Connie. Discover how every experience is an opportunity for spiritual expansion when we observe and use them from the higher perspective of our soul. Explore how we can create more alignment in our lives by focusing on the essence of the experience we want, rather than the form. Learn about ways of living and working together that can build a more harmonious and cooperative world. In each episode, we share awarenesses and tools that you can use in your own soul's journey to create more love, peace, and joy. Soul Musings starts now. So hi everyone, welcome to Soul Musings, exploring and embracing higher perspectives. And we're just going to start as always with just a centering process. So take in a deep breath, maybe put your hand on your heart. And now just see a beautiful stream of light coming from the highest place you can imagine, down through the top of your head and all through your body and all levels of consciousness. Pushing away anything of a negative nature, anything you no longer need. And as you breathe in again, just fill all those places that have been cleared with light and love and peace and joy. And experience the comfort of that, and then slowly come back present here with us. So on that level of the light that we are inwardly is where we're connected and one. And I always like to go to that place with everyone to start. So a great episode with my colleague Jack Reed, who again is the founder of Community Planet Foundation, the author of The Next Evolution, which is a blueprint for transforming the planet. And Jack's joining us again for the second episode focused on cooperative communication. This time we're going to be talking about listening. Yeah, welcome, Jack. How are you doing today? Okay, so on February 13th, we did a show with Dr. Pat where we talked more about Community Planet and the consensus decision-making class that Jack and I co-facilitate and co-founded. And last month, as part of the skills that we teach in consensus for people to come into agreement on and alignment in decisions that are for the highest good and work for everybody, we focus on communication skills that engender cooperation. You know, most of us talk, and often language can be used, sometimes even as a weapon, but often to alienate, to dominate. And we're looking at skills that help people connect and engage and cooperate and come into that alignment with each other. So from a higher perspective, being that we're one in that family of man and our divinity, anything that fosters separation or againstness gets in the way of that experience of us both as the soul that we are and also in terms of the oneness, the unity that we are. And I think you can look around the world and kind of recognize some of this. So communicating for cooperation is to use language, which it'd be nice if I could do, right? Okay. It's how do we use language to connect and cooperate, and not only with others but also with ourselves. How do we listen to ourselves, which is the theme of today, and also how do we talk with loving and kindness to ourselves? Communication is not just with other people. I know Jack mentioned the other day when we were talking that that's one thing they don't talk about in school. We don't learn communication skills, and this is. Some of this may come very naturally. You may say, what's the big deal? I do this all the time. And for others, it might actually seem a little bit different or even strange.
Communication for cooperation is consistent with our Community Planet vision of a world that works for everyone and works for the highest good of all concerned. This is why, in our view of consensus, we talk about alignment versus just agreement, because we're looking to align with that consciousness of the highest good for all concerned.
Another really potent quote that I've heard, and I'm going to just look for this and share it with you. It came from one of my spiritual teachers, John Roger, and he says, "Listening is one of the deepest, most profound signs of loving. Listening to yourself and listening to others. Your heart goes out and wraps around them, and God's spirit of loving embraces you both." And I just love that image. And that's actually true in my experience as well. So make sure that you're looking at this not only from our interactions with others or people, but again, how are you listening? How are you communicating with yourself? Thank you, Jack. I think you have another quote that you love.
One of my favorite quotes on communication, and after I heard this, it really changed the way that I thought about communication. This was a quote originally attributed to George Bernard Shaw, which is, "The biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place."
Mm-hmm.
And I found that so true a lot of the times. It brings up the awareness that what the speaker says and what the listener hears may be very different. And even if what is heard is accurate, the meaning and references that each has for the words may not at all be the same, causing the communication to really be out of alignment.
Yeah, I think, just think to yourself, if you ever had a misunderstanding where somebody told you they said something and you heard something very different, that doesn't enhance the connection and the engagement that you have. So looking at how we can try to avoid that missed communication or misunderstanding of the communication that's taken place is a lot of what we're going to do here. One of the ways that can work is that the listener can be checking along the way in the conversation if they are tracking with what the spirit is saying and the intention that the speaker may have.
And speaking of that intention, I think it's just as important in listening to have the intention of cooperation, listening for cooperation, alignment, and engagement as it is when speaking to have that intention. Without that positive intention, we may instead be just waiting to share our own ideas instead of really wanting to know the speaker's point of view. We may be listening to contradict or poke holes in what others are saying to find a way to make them wrong. Is our intention to be in alignment with the conversation and with the speaker, or our intention to be right and to come up with some contradictions or whatever? And this happens so often in communication in our model of, are we having the intention of alignment, or are we having the intention to be right or to separate?
In organizations, when I worked as a consultant, that communication loop of saying things, having the intention to really hear, and then acknowledging that it's been heard was just really potent. When there wasn't that kind of closing the loop, it just almost drained the energy, and projects would just not go forward, and people would be misunderstanding and doing things that were not what they intended to do with the interaction with other departments, with other people. When they close that communication skill, and that goes with, I worked in organizations where the top of the organization actually listened to people, listened up, it wasn't just top-down communication. But if they didn't tell people that they actually heard what they were contributing, it had the same effect. People felt like they were not heard. You might recognize sometimes in voicemails in businesses, especially, they'll have something that says, we'll get back to you within 24 or 48 hours. And hopefully they follow through on that, because that really addresses that same aspect of what we're talking about an incomplete communication link. So today we're going to cover some listening skills that you can use consciously in conversations.
My experience is that if a person has a clear intention to listen for connection, engagement, and understanding, the skills we're going to talk about here will likely come pretty naturally. However, absent that intention for alignment, the inverse is also true. When we consciously use good listening skills, we can help create an attitude of real listening and cooperation in our interchange.
So one of the things that people may have or may or not have heard this term is active listening, which is a technique for facilitating the engagement and the safety in a conversation. It's basically just letting the speaker know that we are engaged and we're interested in what is being said. So, Jack, can you give some examples of that maybe?
Some examples might be using encouragers like "uh-huh," or "I can see that," or "I understand," or "I'm listening."
And that I'm listening one brings up something for me because I like to use that in a conversation when I'm, for some reason, breaking eye contact with the speaker and maybe start multitasking or just, but I may still be listening. I may get up and, change to another chair, something like that. But I want people to know I'm still focused on what they're saying. And for me, that actually brings up another point that having eye contact between the speaker and the listener, and if you're the listener, looking at the speaker and letting them know that you are engaged with them, unless you're on the phone or something, is an important way also to listen actively and facilitate that kind of engagement. For me, when a speaker is not looking at me, it's just hard to believe that they're actually interested in what I'm saying. Also, when there's no response to communication, these little encouragers, I understand, I'm listening, they're not a lot of communication, but it's enough that the speaker's acknowledging that they're hearing what's being said. They're telling the speaker they're receiving it. And then otherwise, for me, I imagine, okay, they're judging what I'm saying. They didn't get what I'm saying. All they're doing is thinking about what they want to say. And that doesn't, it leads for me to a feeling of separation with the other person. So let's just demo some active listening and be aware of the ownership language that we talked about last month. And also being empathetic to the speaker. You don't have to agree, but you can be empathetic. Okay.
So, Connie, what would be your active listening response if I said something like, "I'd like it if people didn't throw things on the ground and thus help preserve the beauty of our city"?
I might say, I can't understand that. I feel the same way. Another example might be,
and if I said, I didn't handle that situation as well as I could have, and now I know how I could be better the next time.
As an active listener, I might say, I agree. Focusing on the learning is a good approach. So, going on to another kind of communication listening skill is something called drawing out the information. Let's say you're listening, but you're really not understanding either the references that the speaker is making, or you're not really tracking with them, or you want to know more because you are interested. So you can do this by asking questions, but the effective way of doing that is to use what we call open-ended questions. An open-ended question doesn't have a yes or no for an answer. These kind of questions they're best used usually when the speaker is at a stopping point, not necessarily in a way that interrupts the flow of their sharing. So let's look at some examples of that.
So I'm going to try the same statement again.
Okay.
I handled the situation as well as I could have, and now I know how I could do better than next time.
Okay, so sort of a humorous one comes to mind. Do you really expect me to believe you will do better next time? Okay, forgive me, that wasn't an empathetic response. And it was a closed question. The person's going to say yes or no, or more likely get insulted. Let me try again. How about this? How do you think you might do it next time? What's a way? And they can answer however that would be. Because I actually might be very interested in a different approach and how they might have learned to do it differently. Let's try another example.
Okay, I'm going to say I've been a vegetarian for 47 years, which actually is true.
So my response in a closed question would be, so you eat only fruits and vegetables. That doesn't get me very far. I might, if I was interested in wanting to know more, say, well, as a vegetarian, what foods do you include in your diet? Or I might say, how do you make sure you get all the nutrients you need if you're limiting the kinds of foods you eat? Could be other
Here's,
kinds of things. Yeah.
here's some other kinds of open-ended responses. Might say something like, can you give me an example of what you mean? Or could you expand on that?
Mhm. Yeah. All of those kind of things that are open to whatever the speaker has to say and doesn't zero in and limit on just a yes or a no. Okay, so we're going to move on to another skill, which is called perception checking. So, Jack, why don't you give it a shot at explaining what that is?
So, as you said, another listening skill is perception checking, which is paraphrasing and or summarizing your understanding of the speaker's message and then checking the accuracy of your perceptions with the speaker. Rather than making assumptions, this contributes to engagement and safety in the communication. This relates to the common occurrence of people having different references for words, concepts, and experiences. This happens all the time. This is a skill that can be used to clarify any differences in perceptions to be able to and then be able to proceed with common understandings.
Okay, so let me see if I got that. Perception checking is a way where I, as the listener, which I just was to what you were explaining, would paraphrase, summarize, say in my own words what it is that you were communicating. It would just, instead of making assumptions, I would say, okay, Jack, is this what you meant? That as a listener, I summarize and I paraphrase. Is that accurate in terms of what you were trying to communicate?
Yes, that was pretty accurate in what I was trying to say.
So what I just did there was to try to demonstrate a perception checking in real time in terms of what Jack said and how I might explain it in my own words, and basically let him know that I either got it or double check if maybe there was something I missed. What are some other ways of doing perception checking?
Well, one that I remember from the movies was Robert De Niro standing in front of a mirror doing some perception checking with himself when he was saying, "Are you talking to me?"
Well, yeah, that is one kind of perception checking. I don't know if that's the most effective one we're trying to communicate to people, but it was cute. Thank you. What are some ones that we might suggest?
Okay, I might say, if I'm understanding you correctly, do you mean that, 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 that? And paraphrasing what it is that I heard and understood. Or I could say, after having been giving in a situation where I was giving a directive at work, for instance, I could say about the timing. I could say something like, you'd like me to have that completed and emailed to you by next Tuesday.
And that kind of thing, either in a business situation or even agreement between friends, I think is just really important to just summarize what you've decided and check it and make sure both people have the same experience. I've had many situations where I thought we had an agreement to do one thing or one way, or somebody was going to do something by this time or that time, and didn't happen. And this is just a really simple tool to say, is this what we're agreeing to? Is this what you'd like for me? And it makes a huge difference in terms of keeping engagement and connection and not creating more separation or alienation. One of the issues that when we were even talking about this episode that comes up is that some of these skills, when you want to say something as the listener, there's kind of a tension between the person speaking and not wanting to interrupt them, but maybe they're using terms or pronouns and you're not sure what they're referring to. So as they go on, I may be, as a listener, missing most of what they're saying because I'm not really sure if we have the same references. And this is another way where perception checking can be really useful. So let's just make this more personal. So, Jack, when we're talking together, like when we were planning this episode, if you're explaining an idea and maybe I'm not totally following you, what's a way that would work for you that wouldn't seem as much of an interruption, but would make sure that I could track with you because I'm not losing you as you go along? Is there anything that you might suggest?
Yeah, well, if somebody is talking in larger sound bites than the listener can process it, if the intention is to really be in alignment again, it's good to do one of these things. The listener can tell the speaker that they want to first check if they understood what is being said. That's doing some perception checking
Mm-hmm.
before the speaker continues.
Okay.
And also to check if the listener is tracking. The speaker can take responsibility by stopping and asking something like, "Are you with me so far?" This, which again points out the value of active listening. And one of the things I also hear a lot is that I did this when people say the word this or them or some of those kind of pronouns like that. I often have to stop them and say, what do you mean by this?"
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes words that are more specific can have many different meanings to different people. And when you're using a pronoun of this or that, it may be clear in your mind because you might have just talked about it or you're thinking about it. It may not be clear to the listener. And just talking about that too, because we run into that about larger sound bites, meaning I think I'm probably more guilty of that, where I could just have an idea and start running with it. And if there was a word that the listener didn't really know what I was referring to, they're going to miss the whole rest of the communication. Again, we want to be sensitive to interrupting. So, one key I've used in the past with people, and maybe we can use this too, is just kind of go like a timeout. Like, this means have an agreement ahead of time. Like this means I need you to stop for a second because I am interested in what you're saying. And I think I missed something because some of this that's continuing is not making sense. So it's something you can work out with a person that maybe you're having an ongoing relationship with. May not be true in a one-time kind of occurrence, but or saying, "Can I interrupt you for a minute? I want to make sure I got what you're saying, and I wasn't sure what your reference was here." Okay, other situations where we might want to use active listening here.
The person is speaking in larger sound bites. Uh, the listener might not have the bandwidth to really understand and stay with what the listener is saying, or they may be focused on the last thing that's said and thoughts going through our minds like, what are they talking about, or what does that mean, and not be therefore listening to the next thing that's being said. So at that point, the timeout and the perception checking would be very helpful, because otherwise the conversation can quickly go out of alignment.
Well, and sometimes I find that I may have something in my own life that's distracting me. And so even though I'm wanting to listen, my thoughts keep going back to this, or I have to do something very important right after the conversation, or we didn't really plan on talking right then. So a good way, if I'm trying to be a sincere listener, keeping the engagement with the other person, I may just be very transparent about that. It's like, I'm wanting to hear this, and I don't think we can have this level of conversation right now because it's just very hard for me to be present, not anything to do with you. It's just for me. And maybe we can reschedule a time when we really have the space to continue this. Has that worked for you, Jack? Is that something you've...
That works for me, and it's something that I have to remember to do.
Okay. So another way that we're going to talk about a form of good listening, keeping the connections, is perception checking, but on another level, not just of the words and the ideas, but on the feeling level, on the deeper meaning level. So that we're listening to what the person is saying, not only in terms of the words, but also maybe their body language, the eye contact, the tone of voice. And we, in the perception checking, we also include what we're receiving in terms of those other levels from the speaker. You know, what is the deeper feeling or message that they may be giving on another level? And checking that both helps us be accurate about meaning that we're taking, because maybe, the idea is not that we know better than them, but maybe it's something that we're either helping them understand, which may increase their own awareness of the process. They may not have been aware that they were sad or angry or upset, and that may actually open up a new awareness for them. Or we may be misinterpreting, and we want to check that out and not be projecting it onto them. Mm-hmm. And also, if the emotion is something like upset, anger, disturbance, having somebody empathize with that, see that, hear that. I remember a really interesting example with my niece when she was my older niece now, that it was about, I don't know, 7. And, we were over at grandma's and we're all playing, and she fell and hurt herself. And she was like really, really going on about what it is that she wanted to, how bad it was. And I just simply said to her, how bad is it? How bad, and she just said, it's okay. Because she just needed that being seen and being acknowledged. So it can be very powerful. Let's just go through a few examples, and then we're going to wrap up soon. So, Jack, can you start us off with one?
I could say something like, it seems to me that you may be feeling upset that your brother broke his agreements with you. I felt that same way when others have broken agreements with me.
Or I could say, I'm hearing a lot of enthusiasm in your description of your new project, and I'm feeling excited just to listen to you. Now, remember, we're not mind reading here, so we're not trying to tell the person what they're feeling. We're trying to just reflect back to them what we've received as the speaker. We have a question from someone that wrote in from last month, but it looks like we're going to cover that next time, because it has to do with what happens if you're using ownership language and other people aren't, and how do you handle that? And I think that's an excellent question. So as we're wrapping up here, we're going to just remind you that you can, in fact, tell us, comment on what you, or ask questions about what we're talking about. How are you using them? You can visit soulmusings.org to set up a free 15-minute consult, to book an appointment, join my mailing list. And then Jack's got an offer that you can also take advantage of today or whatever.
Yeah, the book I wrote, The Next Evolution, A Blueprint for Transforming the Planet. If you'd like to receive a copy of that, go to the communityplanet.org website, communicate with me there, and write to me and say why you would like to receive a copy of that book, which did win awards, by the way.
Okay, so we're gonna stop here, and please tune in next time. We're gonna have a very dynamic podcast on a higher perspective on aging and a culture obsessed with youth. Can you really live the rest of your life as the best of your life? We're going to explore that with one of my friends and colleagues that has a doctorate and is 94 and still going strong. So just as we complete here, just take in a deep breath, maybe put your hand on your heart again, and just center in that divine essence of who you are. Feel the love and the peace of that. And now send that energy to Spirit, God, the universe, whatever it is you relate to, as your gift to be used for the highest good of all concerned in this world and any part of God's creation, for more love, peace, harmony, and grace. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all for being here, and God bless you. Peace. You have been listening to Soul Musings, exploring and embracing higher perspectives with me, Dr. Connie. Tune in every second Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific to learn how to use every experience for spiritual expansion and how to create the essence of the experience you want instead of the form. Learn about ways of living and working together that help build a more loving and cooperative world. Visit soulmusings.org to see more about what I offer and to book a 15-minute free consult.